Hey, welcome back to another episode of Dark Before Dawn. We're talking to people who have extraordinary stories, remarkable overcoming journeys, and have faced adversity that is kind of unlike any other, and just significant tragedy, loss, things like that. And folks have, through their faith, of course, have been able to rise up from the ashes, if you will, and really, I I would say our scars become our scaffolding, and it has allowed our guest today to elevate in a direction toward a purpose that I don't know that she thought really was in the cards for her until that crazy turn of events back in 2017. So I want to introduce and read a little bit about our guest today. Michelle Black is a Gold Star widow. Her husband, Bryan, was a Green Beret and was lost his life in action back in 2017 in an ambush in Niger, Africa. Really a uh, botched leadership, I will say, and I'm not going to put words in Michelle's mouth. She wrote a book and talked all about it, and we're going to talk about that. But from what I've heard in all the interviews I've listened to Michelle's story, there was a lot of botching going on. But the guys did what they were called to do. They stayed true to the mission, true to each other. They were obedient, faithful soldiers, and were led into this compromising situation that they really couldn't get out of, and it ultimately took um, some lives that should have never been taken. So I know she's an author. Like I said, she's the first person to graduate high school in her family. I think graduated from college, Cal Poly State, and did what was it? Environmental science and horticulture. That's pretty cool. But has written a book, has been published in the New York Times, the Daily Beast, Task and Purpose. She lives in the great Pacific Northwest. So I want to formally welcome Michelle Black. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I was the first female in my family to graduate college or high school, and the first person in my family to
Wow.
have ever went to and graduated college.
Wow, that's crazy. And from what I heard along the way, your story, some of the interviews, you got a pretty big extended family. Am I right? It's like north of 20 cousins. I don't know. Is that right?
Yes,
That's
I have
crazy.
26 cousins. And I mean, since I graduated, I was one of the older, cousins. So there have been some since that time. They've all graduated high school now, of course, and there
Yes.
have been several who have gone on and gotten degrees and so that's been impressive. But yeah, 26 cousins and four siblings and yeah, just
That-
a lot of
That's
people all in one
crazy.
little town.
That's
So
crazy. So you sort of started the process of showing folks it could be done at the college level, and along the way, met Bryan. He was a Green Beret in the Army and was, like we talked about, just kind of a victim of a botched situation and a mission that went south in an ambush. So I kind of want you to give us just a little idea of the 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 day that I mean, we're coming up, what, last month came up on 4 years since that time. It was in October of 2017 that happened. Talk to us about maybe the weeks leading up to the mission, because I remember you saying you kind of had a little bit of a gut feeling. Like I always say, moms and wives, man, if they've got a gut feeling, man, we need to listen to this. But I know you mentioned something about you had kind of an uneasy feeling. So take us a little bit up to that point, and then receiving that call, or receiving the knock on the door and that kind of thing, and then a little bit of what transpired after.
okay. Yeah, I've always been very sensitive to just premonitions and just knowing when things are going to happen. And sometimes I feel like it's God telling me. I hear very specific things. Other times it's just I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
So with Bryan, it started pretty much the day he left, dropping him off at the airport. I didn't feel right about dropping him off, but I felt like I had no other choice because it's the Army. You either go and or you lose your job. So it didn't feel reasonable. And there was no argument I could make for it other than a feeling. And it felt like Bryan was feeling the same. And so he left. It was, I believe, August 28th. And within the first week, I began looking out my window all the time, looking for strange cars to pull into my driveway, men in uniform to be walking across my lawn. So I felt like I was constantly watching that for weeks. And one day, a couple weeks after Bryan deployed, my youngest son, who's very similar to me, he seems to always be very spiritually aware. He came up to me and basically said, "Mom, Dad's not coming home, is he?" And I had to lie because I felt the same. And I just said, "No, of course he's coming home. We just need to pray for him like we always do." And a couple of weeks later, I got the knock at the door.
Yeah, I wonder too. You mentioned the feeling and kind of looking outside a lot during those days and weeks, and I got to think that even, most military families probably have that little bit always kind of that itch of somebody's going to pull in the driveway, like, it could be any moment, but to you it felt a little more than just kind of it's just part of the, kind of cost of doing business with the military and being married to somebody in the military. You had a little bit more to go on, and you felt like maybe you were being told something. And so when that day happened and that knock came at the door, I mean, out of body experience, surreal isn't even a big enough word. Like, you knew in your spirit you had to be strong for the two boys, and but take us, I guess, a little bit through kind of what you had to dig into about yourself, and what kind of surprised you, I guess, during those a couple days or that moment. What shocked you about yourself in that moment where you really had to dig in for strength?
I think the most surprising thing, and I've talked about this with a lot of other widows, was that I didn't know beforehand, is the first thing that happens. I wasn't one of those people who screamed and fell to the ground. I mean, I definitely, my knees buckled. Um, but I went into very real, tangible shock. And I hear a lot of widows do that. It's a strange feeling where all of a sudden everything's happening around you, and it's almost like you're at the center of the storm because you are.
Yeah.
And you're just watching it happen. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't, I mean, I guess you could say it wasn't like being in an out of body experience, but that wasn't really it. It was more like, yeah, like you were just at the center of the storm and everything was swirling around you, going crazy. People were freaking out, people were crying, and I was having to make calculated decisions. And it was hard to grasp anyone thoughts were just coming and going really fast. And so trying to make calculated decisions in the middle of that. And fortunately for shock, I was able to be completely shut off from all the chaos around me. So, like you see people in shock sometimes and they're just staring at a wall, like they're not even mentally present. And then that was it. So I would say that was kind of where I where I worked from. And fortunately, growing up, well, not necessarily growing up in the church, but growing up in a Christian family, and then in college studying the Bible backwards and forwards. I had some key um, memorized verses. And so I just drew from those. And it was like, okay, I just have to trust He who makes all things new. There's always, you know, there's always something better just around the bend. So it was just like, I have to trust God.
Yeah.
He's got
And,
a
and
plan
you
in all
were,
of this.
and you also, so your upbringing, you mentioned some of that. You kind of grew up in you guys worked hard, right? You guys grew up in maybe a agricultural society or a family that was more kind of in the trenches, right? You guys worked, and your dad was, he didn't let you really buckle under certain emotional stress that you might go through. Like he was one of those, hey, let's pull ourselves up by the bootstraps kind of guy. Am I right?
Oh yeah.
Tell it. Yeah. And so that might have, I mean, do you feel like that played a part in, just some of your upbringing in that moment of, did you feel like you already had sort of a foundation to be able to handle adversity anyway?
Yeah, I'd started from a young age, just, fighting a lot of different battles just naturally, because I was a very, now it's so much more common in our society to talk about people with anxiety, social anxiety,
Mhm.
and I think that's good. I think it's good to um, be cognizant of that and sensitive to that, aware of it, and like, okay, they're not just a rude person, they're very uncomfortable here, or they're socially anxious. But growing up, I was very, we just would call it shy. I was shy. I couldn't speak to people or make eye contact. I had very high social anxiety, but I was not allowed to use that as an excuse or a crutch. So we would go out, and I had a big, loud family, and no one was allowed to order for me at restaurants. And so it was my dad just sitting there, letting it be silent until I would squeak out my order. And sometimes I'd have to order, repeat myself 10 times before the waitress heard me. And that was excruciating for
Yeah.
me, but it made me push ahead. And yeah, there were no excuses in my family. You learned, if you couldn't do it, you learned how to do it. Um, and we were also a very self-made family. My dad, I come from a long line of business owners, and so everybody figured out their own, little niche and worked on doing that. So like my dad's dad owned one of the biggest sporting goods in Southern California growing up.
Mm.
My mom's dad owned a rug manufacturing company. He was one of the ones to develop shag carpeting.
Wow.
And my dad, even though he got his GED when he, or not, yeah, he got his GED when he was 17 and left home. He ended up learning the auto body industry, opened up his own auto body shop, ended
Wow.
up then to forward, to make that more successful, he bought a tow truck company so he could tow all the cars to his shop.
Yeah.
And then the next thing you know, he pretty much owned all the
Wow.
only auto body shop in town, in a fairly large and growing town. I mean, it was a
Wow.
small town, but it was isolated. So he had all the business, and
Yeah.
he eventually bought out a lot of the real estate, commercial real estate property in town.
Wow.
So, and we worked hard, as
That's
kids.
cool.
It was up at 7 and feeding the animals, or out
Yeah.
helping lay fencing. And I mean, it
Yeah.
was just, yeah. So
Some of the, well, and not, I'm sorry to interrupt, but no, I just can't. It's hard to see back then, and kids now too. Like you can't really tell what your parents are trying to build in you at the time. It's just a drag, right? And we fight it. But your dad having those ethics and principles, and the work ethic in that, I mean, subconsciously built this in you to withstand to some degree something that would happen years later that would just turn your world upside down. And Like you said, the scripture started coming back to you. I would imagine some of those things that your dad instilled in you kind of came back and just really sort of solidified your footing emotionally to a degree. Again, it's not a perfect system, but if we can go to this place of your book. So after the news, it's a long process of, just grieving and uh, dealing with what comes next. Like you're the sole provider, you're the anchor of the family with your two boys, and what's next had to just kind of come up in your mind a lot. Well, you wrote a book called Sacrifice, a gold star widow's fight for the truth. I got to ask first, did you ever like consider yourself a big writer before this? And then along the way, like what were you hoping that would come out of this process of writing the book?
I had never considered myself a big writer. I had started writing a few times just because I enjoyed it, and I thought, who knows, maybe one day I'll have time, and I love reading, and so I would love to write a book. And I thought, oh, I'll write children's stories, or I'll write some of the stories from growing up. There's got to be some good lessons, or something. I think we've all heard people say, oh, you should write a book about that, just
Yeah.
the way, so I thought, oh, maybe I will someday. But no, I never really thought that I would actually write a book and actually manage to get one published. That was a very daunting idea. Um, and when I began this book, it didn't seem like there were any other options.
Mm.
It was just from the minute Bryan died, I thought, I'm going to write a book about Bryan, because I felt that kids need to know who their father is. They need to know who their parents are, so they know who they are. And I thought, this is a tragedy on that level too, because these kids, my boys, are never going to know this incredible man who their father is, and that they have him in them, and that they can aspire to be greater because of where they come from. And so that was my first initial thought, is I'm going to write down all these incredible stories about Bryan and about our life, and I'm going to put that in a little book and self-publish it. And great, I didn't think by any stretch that, oh, I'm going to get this great published book and all these people are going to want to read about Bryan, or me. Like, we're not that interesting. But I thought, we're going to collect this and put it into a book for family and for my kids.
Mm.
And then as things progressed after Bryan was killed, that's when my goal changed from, this book needs to be about Bryan, to, I'm not even writing a book about Bryan anymore. This incident is turning into a complete, just what the military calls a FUBAR. So it's,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
effed up beyond belief, beyond
Right.
all
All recognition.
all
Yeah.
recognition. Yes. And so basically it's I just thought, this is one of those things where you always wonder, like, what's the real truth behind the Pat Tillman story? We all hear about
Sure.
Pat Tillman. What's the real story behind Benghazi? And I thought, what's the real truth behind the Niger ambush that my husband was killed in? I, at the very least, deserve to know that. And so do all the other family members. So from that point forward, I kind of just, as I do naturally, being a socially anxiety ridden person, kind of pulled back into my own little ball and started contacting like the guys on the team, and just started this whole thing of trying to root out the truth for myself.
you felt like a detective at this point, right? You were really going to try to dig and get facts and specifics from people on the ground. I mean, what better place to go? So you started sort of compiling this information. But yeah, you almost had to put on the hat of detective, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly. And so at that point, especially once the team members started being blamed, and I knew they were under gag orders, and it was clear to me that there was a point when General Waldhauser, the commander of all of AFRICOM, which is Africa Command,
Mm,
so he's the commander, he's ordered this investigation. And at the end of the investigation, he goes before the media and he says, all teams on the continent are performing well, but this team is not indicative of what special operators do. So he insulted my husband and all of the men who fought and died alongside him. So when he did that, that's when I was like, okay, there is nobody on my side. There is nobody that I can trust. The media is reporting this. They've bought it hook, line, and sinker. And so the guys were at a complete loss. They were about to run and be investigated for a second time and
mm.
be punished. And so they didn't know who to trust. So I just said, hey, you can trust me. Like if Bryan had come back, if he'd survived, he'd be in the same position as you guys are.
Mm-hmm.
So we all made an agreement and we began moving forward from there. So I ended up interviewing them. I interviewed Major Alan Van San, who lost his job over it. I interviewed the former South Africa commander, General Don Bolduc. And I interviewed men who were back at the advanced operating base running communications during the
Mm.
ambush, as well as the former Heliborne unit commander who ended up getting turned around, T. Marlett, and a couple guys who also happened to be on the ground during the investigative team's visit to Tongo Tongo following the ambush and saw where the brass was and what the area looked like after the ambush, which included trees having limbs sawed off, like there had been like the villagers were trying to cover for what
Yeah.
happened there. So you couldn't see all the bullet holes. Where Le David had fallen, there were several piles of brass. One of the guys had told me, yeah, he clearly had emptied a couple magazines while he laid under there, just fighting until his last breath. He goes,
So
it was
I
very
have a
clear.
question. I have a question. Who did you get? You had to have had somebody sort of help facilitate this digging process, because how did you know all these pieces to try to connect, and all the people that you had just listed of who you interviewed? Like, what was, did you have somebody that said, okay, we need to get this guy, or did you just kind of know this is who I want to interview? And you, like, how did you get all of those pieces in place to interview those key uh, participants?
Honestly, the survivors, once they began to be punished, they were willing to help me and willing to contact people and say, hey, who's interested in speaking with her?
I
She
got
isn't. And I'd made them this promise, like, I'm not the media. I will not give this to anybody. If you interview with me and you change your mind, I will toss out the interview if you suddenly become uncomfortable. Up until
you. Yeah.
I sign with an actual publisher, you don't need to you don't need to worry, because these interviews belong to you. If you say, hey, I want you to share it with this news outlet,
Yeah.
I will. If you say I don't want you to, then I won't. And the other thing was, before, so they gave me all their photographs and all their videos as well.
Yeah.
And then everything I would go through piece by piece, which people are comfortable with me using this photo. If you're in the photo and you don't want your face shown, let me know and I'll either cut the photo off. So I have
Yeah.
some photos where there's a full photo of like the entire team,
Mm-hmm.
and I've cut it down to just a few people. And that's because those men specifically only wanted their face shown,
Yeah.
or specific people didn't.
Yeah.
So there were pieces like that, but also, yeah, they would contact other people back at the who were at the AOB with them, or that they knew were at the AOB, and
Yeah.
hey, are you interested in talking, or do you at least want to give your 2 cents on this? What's your recollection from that
Yeah.
day, without adding your name to it? So
Right.
we'd get little
That's
things like
cool.
that going.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I don't know if you like being quoted back to yourself or not, but I wanted to read a quote from your book that is pretty remarkable. And so it says, you say, I am heartbroken, but I am not broken. I will not be another victim of the men who took my husband's life. That quote just kind of shook me a little bit, and when I read it, and I have to know. So, how have you, is vindicated the right word? Would you say that you maybe surprised yourself in a way when you wrote this? Like, what about Michelle Black came out during this, after this book was published, released, and talked about? What about you came out that you were like, wow, that really was me. Like, I had no idea that I had that in me. Like, was there something about you that surprised you?
Um, I think because I'd been through so much in my life prior, I've always felt that these things just lie dormant. And when necessary, they rise to the surface.
Mm,
And so by this point in my life, when this happened, no, I felt like I kept these things at bay and trusted in the process that the military, that the officials running the investigation would be honest, that the officers involved would be honest. So I kept that part of me at bay. Um, I think who I am as a person, I always want to be kind, gracious, forgiving, and hope for the best. And I don't want these pieces to rise up where suddenly I've reached that point where I am so fed up
mm,
where I have to become that warrior. I
mm.
don't want to have to be. And I think we live in a society where we brag about our strength and I'm so savage. Don't ever hope that you're put in a position where you have to use that savage. Don't ever want that. I've been there several times. And we all have that inside of us, but we
Yeah,
shouldn't want it.
and your back was against the wall in this process of writing the book, and you had a mission, just like Bryan had a mission. You had a mission to get the truth and to tell the story, and out of respect and honor for those folks who died. And so you kind of had your back against the wall. You sort of had to dig into those qualities that maybe you're not so willing to exhibit on a daily basis, right? And maybe that I'll kind of, I'll come right at you and get in your face if I have to. And because you had a mission, you kept the main thing, which is commendable. Because and I consider you very courageous, to dig in, because I can only imagine the people that had some things to say, maybe in a negative light, about the book or you, or the, like you said, the fallen soldiers that they were saying weren't indicative of those teams, which is, I don't think I can say the word for that on here, but yeah. So you had to sort of get those things to come out of you, because they sort of forced you to do that to get the truth. But um, yeah, I think, you know writing this book, obviously you've had people ask you, was it cathartic? And maybe it was, but do you feel like you completed the mission that you set out to do with this book, and the truth that you were in search of?
I feel like I've begun to. I feel like when this book reaches the amount of people that I think it needs to reach in order to affect change within our military system, and um, the thing is that I love our military. I love the ideals. I love service, sacrifice. I think all of these things are so key and so important. There's so many things in the military that I love. What I don't love is the fact that there can be officers who force men on a mission and then can turn around and allow these men to take the fall for their decisions.
Yeah.
The chain of command is failing those at the lowest levels. And until we can fix that issue, my book has not done the job or the purpose that that I set out for it to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's going to be a process and a journey. And I know it's happening. Like you said, I think it's starting to land, right? I think it's starting to land in those places that it needs to land in to tell the story and people to really get on board and be behind what you're saying, because that needs to be told. I've listened to you talk about this in detail that we may not get into here, but in the details of, and I encourage people read the book, because there are details there that are very important for this process. But I mean, I hear you talk about it, and there's a lot that needs to be said, and I think it's awesome. And I'm sure you've heard from other Gold Star families that were not only involved with this particular mission, but other missions where they're just kind of like, "You go, girl." Like, we need a voice. Like, the people that are left behind need a voice to honor the people that were taken, and that's what you're doing, which is just,
Yeah.
it's mind boggling to me. So kind of transition a little bit, was there anything pleasant about this process? Because like I told you before we get record, I want to know more about Michelle. Like, I want to know about this thing that happened. And I hear you talk about how great Bryan was, just a crazy intelligent guy, smart, chess champion, that's kind of thing, and a Green Beret. But I want to know about Michelle, and I want to know, did did something pleasantly surprise you? Anything throughout the process of writing this book?
There were a lot of things that surprised me, both bad
Right.
and good.
I was going to
Uh,
say pleasantly. I knew there were on the other side of the coin, but yeah,
yeah.
what about pleasantly?
Pleasantly, I would say that, um, well, I mean, there were parts where I felt like I could just flow and write forever, and I absolutely loved it. And
Mm,
despite the really painful parts, I mean, painful beyond um, the heartache of certain pieces that I had to write, but what I mean is painful as far as the editing process. It
mm,
is brutal. You have to allow someone to take, when you write, it is so personal. You pour out your soul, and the last thing you want, it's like letting somebody read your journal and then mark through it and say, this is stupid, what you just wrote is dumb, no one's gonna like this. I mean, that's what it's, that, like, you're
feels
so
like that, doesn't
lame. I
it?
mean, that's
Feels
the
like,
editing process. I mean, it's not really like that, but it is.
right.
You talk about, criticism versus constructive criticism, and I had to remind myself so many times, okay, this is not criticism, this is constructive criticism, and I need to, like, recover from this criticism, maybe take a day, and then get back up tomorrow, dust myself off, and say, okay, this was for my own good, and this person isn't doing this because they want me to fail, they're doing it because they want me to improve and succeed. And so one of the most wonderful things was just that there were so many people who wanted me to succeed, who took a chance on me. And that, to me, that was very, very, I don't know,
It's
encouraging,
refreshing.
but
Yeah, yeah, it's good to
yeah.
hear. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it was people all over, from between, people at the New York Times, the LA Times. I mean, just different people at different newspapers, like major newspapers, reaching out and say, hey, if there's anything we can do to help you, um, or agents who were like, we'd love to help you, or editors, once I at my publishing house, that
Hmm.
my editor just being like, you're doing awesome, keep it up, like, this, I know this is a hard process, don't take it personally, you don't have to accept our edits,
Hmm.
but these are just suggestions. So just learning that process and realizing, like, everybody's there on my team cheering me on, even if I get in my head a little and think that, oh, they're being critical.
Yeah,
No, they're on your side.
yeah,
So that was a really neat thing to learn, is like, hey,
for
people
sure.
aren't against me. And I think after going through such a long period of feeling attacked after losing Brian,
Yeah.
and then having the media tell these stories that weren't true, but they didn't know any better. They were being fed these stories by the military officials running the investigation, and you know, and then the video coming out of the Niger
Yeah.
ambush, the head cam video. So feeling constantly under attack for 9 months. I mean, there really was what people call PTSD. It was very, very much real.
Wow.
So it was a hard thing to transition into. Oh, these aren't people attacking me. These are people who are helping me to improve.
Yeah.
And so that was a really healthy process. And that was one of the things I loved most about writing was how
Yeah.
difficult it was, but overcoming and changing my view of it.
Yeah. That's great. No, that's awesome. And it would be a pleasant surprise given the fact that you were feeling a little bit attacked in some of this process, but to have people in your corner is huge. And that's a perfect segue because I wanted to talk a little bit transition into family, right? Now we're kind of the book's out. You're doing some speaking. This book's making a splash. Still work to be done, but now you've got another hat of you're the mom. You got two boys, and now one of them's I think in high school, and the other one maybe what junior high, middle school, something.
Yep.
Yeah.
8th grade.
So I don't know. Talk about them a little bit, and what's been maybe your biggest hurdle in doing this by yourself and making sure that they uh, hear about their dad a lot or know who he was because like you said you wrote this book because you felt like they needed to know this and so what's been kind of the biggest hurdle but yet maybe the biggest reward with these two guys?
I think the biggest hurdle is any mom of boys, especially who suddenly dad's out of the picture, is that all of those guy things that your husband would do with the boys, you have to do it, or, I mean, no one else is going to do it for you. I mean,
Yeah.
literally,
Yeah.
my one son, he wants to shoot guns, he wants to go to the range. And I'm like, I am not a gun person. He is. When he gets a gun, he's just an incredible shot. He's gone out one summer, the Green Berets took him out and he did some shooting with the guys. And that was awesome. They facilitated this whole like safe shooting range and set it up for him. And he's a remarkable shot. But I am not someone who's been around guns a lot and wants to go out shooting every day. And I'm balancing all the mom stuff and all the work stuff. And so things that dad would normally do with them, they want to learn to fish, they want to learn to hunt, they want to learn to, and I'm just going, okay. I've never hunted in my life. I definitely can't pack a deer out of a hike, go
Yeah.
hike up. Like to me, that's just, overwhelming. And
Yeah.
so that's part of the reason why we moved nearer to Brian's dad, or his parents after he
Mm-hmm.
died, because unfortunately my dad, I lost him about 10 years ago because he was a big hunter, fisher. He did every
Mm-hmm.
sport known to man. He was, a man's man. And so that was awesome, but there's not that. So now I brought them near grandpa. So
Mm.
Brian's dad takes them, you know, um, what is it, to do archery.
Okay.
And so we're talking about maybe setting them up with a gun club with grandpa, but those are big challenges. As a mom, it's really heartbreaking because you just
Mm-hmm.
go, I cannot, there's certain things that as a mom, I cannot do for my teenage boys. I
Yeah.
just can't.
Yeah.
So you try your best, but yeah, you have to be mom and dad. And sometimes that just doesn't work out. So having to teach them things like, okay, here's what you do on a date. Here's how you treat girls. Here's how you, whatever. And that's very complicated.
Well, you've got a very good perspective though for them that can only help them in the long run for that kind of stuff, relationships for sure.
Yeah.
So okay, well, so that's awesome that you moved them back, and you probably got some more folks that are around them that like you sound pretty strategic and calculated. Where I'm sure there's some mentoring or maybe even some coaches or teachers at school or different people that you've probably identified as being valuable resources to be that mentor in a way, or just maybe that person to support them. So I want to ask too, as we sort of kind of navigate toward being respectful of your time and letting you get back to this crazy life, man. There's something I call a smolder switch. So when these calls of sort of the thing that happened with Bryan, or the past of losing your dad, or different things in your life, like you said, you've had an interesting journey of adversity. But when the Bryan Coles start to kind of rear their ugly head again, I don't know if there are triggers that maybe set off certain emotions to a degree for you. Is there something you go to maybe kind of smolder that out a little? Like, what are the things that, and this is for somebody listening that is maybe in the middle of something like this now, and they're these things are flaring up. Do you have moments that flare up emotionally, just triggers that set you off a little bit, in sadness or grief or anger or whatever? What do you control those with? How do you contain that?
Well, I think it's always good to allow yourself to just have a good cry when you need one. But there's also that can't be it. I think some people they allow themselves to just be completely consumed, and their whole life
Mm-hmm.
becomes about this death, about
Mm-hmm.
this loss, and that's very bleak. So what I do is, growing up, I was an athlete. I ran cross country and track in high school and college, and then I started snowboarding at 12. I started skiing when I was like 3. So I was very active, and I was a competitive snowboarder. So I usually go to activities. So
Mm.
I'll go out, and if I'm really having a bad day, if it's anger, I'll try and run it out until I am just ready to fall on the floor and pass out. If it's sadness, I might, have a good cry, and then same thing, go on a run, lift some weights, do something like that. For me, that's a good way to get out all that energy and move it into something positive, and then you're releasing the endorphins from working
Yeah,
out, and that brings your mood up. The worst thing I can do is lay down and sleep, or drink an alcoholic drink,
sure.
because then it turns into days, and feeling sorry for myself, and
Hmm.
getting lost in that woe is me, or trying to seek out attention is another really bad one, because you're never going to get, from other people,
Hmm.
what you need to, fill, or to take care of that pain. And that's nobody else's responsibility but my own.
Hmm.
So I think the worst thing I can do is post on social media having such a bad day, because then that's waiting for people to come in, and they say nice things, but they're not going to be there for you. Nothing's going to change. And I think
Yeah.
that's the hope.
Yeah.
And that just makes the pain worse, and then we blame other people for that. So
Yeah.
yeah, usually what I do is I try and work out. I try and handle it myself, which is the way I was raised.
Yeah.
Handle it yourself. This is nobody else's problem. This is your problem, Michelle. And then I just, as my dad would say, I get after it. So
Yeah.
get out there,
Yeah.
run,
Is
run it
that
out.
is that trans uh, is that transferable to your boys? Like when they have moments, because I know, I don't, what were they? They weren't all that young. I mean, they still remember things maybe like it was yesterday, and
Yeah.
um, only 4 years ago that this happened. So do you try to set that example and kind of pass that torch to them on how to deal with these emotions? Like, are they active? Are they in sort of this support system around them? Like you mentioned, you've got your in-laws there, but are they active? Is that an outlet for them, or what is their coping mechanism, I guess?
Yeah, Bryan was really involved in jujitsu. So they've
Hmm.
started taking jujitsu. They get out a
Awesome.
lot of aggression there. And
Maybe
anger.
with each other sometimes.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it builds the anger when they have to spar against each other,
Sure.
which is just funny.
Yeah.
And yeah, my oldest son he looks just like Bryan. He's built just like Bryan. He's already 6'1", and he'll probably be a solid 230 to 250 when he's
Okay.
full grown.
Wow.
So he likes to go down and work out. So I have a whole workout gym in the garage so he can lift weights and do pull-ups and push-ups and
Mm-hmm.
whatever he wants. So when he's having a hard time, I send him down there and he works out. Uh, and he'll take a few minutes and then he'll usually show up. He's a sweetheart. He's autistic, but you can't really tell, but he'll come upstairs and it's just, sorry mom, I didn't mean it, I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's a real sweetheart. And then my youngest, um he's not quite as active. I'm wanting to get him more active. But I'll send him off just to have a minute, and he does good. I'll be like, go lay down for a minute, take a nap,
Yeah.
or hop in the shower and just cry it out in there by yourself so nobody has to hear you. And yeah, he does good.
That's
So
good. Yeah. No, I mean, you're setting the standard for them, and let's face it, unfortunately, adversity is just a thing in life, and the cost of doing business. And as we get older and more responsibilities, things happen, not to the catastrophic degree that they've experienced. So, I mean, I would almost think for these guys, your sons, and for you, like, the world can't throw anything at you that you can't handle at this point. Like, you guys have been to the pinnacle of loss and pain. So, this series we're doing is called Dark Before Dawn. So talk about, as we close up, I'm going to put a bow on it right here. Cause I know you got a busy day, but did your faith waver through this, or was it one of those things that just became kind of a light, kind of a beacon that sort of led you to the other side of some of this pain? What Speak a little bit about your faith, and then what's next for you? Like, what's the dawn look like? How bright is this going to get for you? Like, you've got a great future ahead of you from speaking and writing more. So talk about your faith and sort of how that kind of pulled you to the other side.
so it's funny because I've heard that, where your faith wavers. For me, it wasn't my faith at all. I'll be honest, I didn't want to go to church,
Mhm.
because what I found was people wanted to give me scriptures. They didn't know what to do with me. And I thought, I know
Mm.
all the scriptures. I don't need a scripture.
Yeah.
The scripture isn't going to get me through anything, you know?
Yeah.
And if it was, I'd open up my Bible and find it. But
Mhm.
I have all the things I need, all the tools already. So I just didn't want to be around my Christian friends. They weren't a comfort at all, which sounds ironic. But
A little
I
disturbing. A
yeah,
little disturbing,
a
right?
little disturbing, yeah.
Yeah.
But then I think back and I'm like, I wouldn't have been a help either to
Yeah, what do
anybody,
you do? Right.
Yeah, like, there's really nothing you can do. What I didn't need was people saying, "Oh, um, what's the verse about, joy will come in the morning,"
Yeah,
so
yeah. Right.
so I was like, I don't need people telling me that when they've never been in this dark of a spot. They have no idea what this is like. What I need to hear is, this sucks. I am so sorry. And that's it. That's all I needed, was like, yes, this is awful. I just needed some recognition that what I was going through was awful. And that's
Mhm.
it. And someone to sit there and listen to me. But nobody wanted to listen because it was
Mhm.
so gnarly. So really at that point, it was just me and my kids, my in-laws, and God. And that was it. I couldn't go to church because I couldn't hear all of the nonsense at that point.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but what I would tell my kids all the time was, life is hard, but it's good. And so is God. And that was it. That was our little saying. Like, life is hard, but it's good. So is God. We'll keep moving forward. Things will get better, because no matter what, you know, I always would say, I've done everything right. I followed all the rules like you're supposed to. And I think as Christians, we get so lost in the idea that if we follow the rules, right, we're good girls and boys, then life is guaranteed to be good. We're going to make
Yeah.
good money. We're
Yeah.
going to live this life that has hardly any, changes. Maybe the most challenging thing is we break up with a boyfriend or a
Right.
girlfriend, and that's painful, but hey, God will get us through it. Well, we leave out, we seem to forget that no, people do actually die.
Hmm.
Horrible things do actually happen, and you're not immune just because you believe in God.
To good people. I mean, things happen
Good
to good people.
people.
Yeah. And Jesus actually tells us this is going to happen. He says, you'll experience tribulation, but, take heart, I've overcome the world. So, there's nobody, no scripture says that you guys, just because you believe means that you're going to be smooth. Life's going to be smooth. That's not true. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we see somebody fall and we think, oh, they must have done something wrong. And I
Sure.
remember thinking that after Brian died, like, wow, I definitely didn't do anything wrong. I know I did everything right. And here
Yeah.
I am. And this is happening to me, not for the first time again. And I thought,
Mhm.
because growing up, it was one thing after another where, finally getting over the shyness and then going to college and having a seizure my first day of college classes. And I was like, what? No one in my family has epilepsy. Like, that's
Wow.
totally random. And being told, well, by my parents, you don't get to come home. You need to overcome this. And so I did. And then,
Yeah.
realizing that I can either be a victim of this or I can move on and live my life um, no different than anybody else, and so I
Yeah.
did. I mean, so I had to learn to overcome and overcome. And then having a
Right.
kid who was born and he had special needs, and I didn't do anything to deserve that, and neither did he.
Right.
Um, and then for him to lose his dad and have to go through that, and be the challenges he faced at school after losing his dad, where he was bullied even by a teacher. I mean, there were so many things that I was like, we don't deserve any of this.
Right.
But I thought, surely God is building us for something remarkable.
Mhm.
And I must be very special
Yeah.
because this is
Wow.
amazing.
Wow. Yeah. And that takes us full circle back to what I said at the beginning. The scars kind of become the scaffolding that elevates us to a purpose that maybe we didn't know about. So
Yeah.
if you've got a blank canvas and you're painting this picture for the next chapter of your purpose in life, obviously the boys, raising them and encouraging, empowering them as part of your purpose. But in light of the book and people out there that need to hear what you have to say and other Gold Star families. So what does your purpose look like going forward?
I hope, what I'd like my purpose to be is to just inspire people to choose to be overcomers and not victims, because I think we have become a society of people who
Mm-hmm.
love victimhood, and
Mm-hmm.
there is no honor in that, and there's no victory in that. There's only death, and you lose your life the minute you give in and decide to become a victim. The rest of your life you might as well be dead, you
Wow.
know
Yeah. And you're giving somebody else the keys, right? You're giving somebody else the keys. And it sounds like to me, you've taken back the keys if they were ever really taken from you, because it sounds like you've been early on, you learned how to drive the bus through adversity, through the storm. But yeah, I see that being exactly what you do going forward. And you and I don't know each other that well, but just hearing a couple of times that you've talked and talking to you today, I can tell that there's more to be done. Like you're just scraping the surface to the people that you're going to inspire and impact. And your boys are just, they haven't even caught a glimpse of what their future holds, because I can't wait to see, like, there's something big, like you said, out there. So yeah, Michelle, if you can let us know, tell us right now, like, where we can go. Is there a website to get the book, maybe to check out some of your speaking engagements that are coming up, or how would anybody book you for a speaking engagement if that was even something you plan to do?
Yeah, I actually am doing a lot of speaking engagements. Let me grab my book. Um, so this is my book. Let me see if I can get it in there. So
There you go.
Sacrifice, a Gold Star Widow's Fight for the Truth. Um, and my website is Michelle Black, or yeah, Michelle Black sacrifice.com. And then you can also find me all across social media, Michelle Black 71, or author Michelle Black on Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I think that's, is the website fairly new? Um,
Yeah, it's a work in progress, but right now, if you do go to michelleblacksacrifice.com, you'll find all the links to my books, all the articles,
okay.
or my book, all the articles I've written, interviews I've done, and you'll find my social media links.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Perfect. Well, it's been an honor, and audience, this did not disappoint. I've been looking forward to this all week. I knew this was going to be powerful, and just to watch the strength and the courage of somebody who's been through the degree of loss that this family's been through, and now she's leading two young boys to be strong and courageous as well. The world needs more people like this. And so, on behalf of the audience, Michelle, I want to thank you. And till next time, she's been Michelle Black. We've been Last in Line. Be blessed.